Breaking barriers in history.
On March 8, 1965, American troops marched into Da Nang in South Vietnam, hoping to end the conflict between the Viet Cong and South Vietnamese and finally conclude the war against the Communists. This battle does not end until March 29, 1973, when the United States withdraws its troops from Vietnam, and it's not long before another war begins. Many American troops return with a mental condition known as PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder, which causes these people to have flashbacks and a change in personality after traumatic events. The combination of being a war veteran and mental illness makes the accomplishment of being able to successfully treat and monitor PTSD even greater as these veterans break this barrier.
PTSD is a mental illness induced from a shocking, traumatic, or dangerous event. Symptoms vary for different people and experiences, and these symptoms may begin months or even years after said event. PTSD is connected to depression, anxiety, and other mental ailments. Specific genes may predispose someone to higher chances of PTSD, and ongoing trauma can cause suicidal thoughts or actions. Different treatments and therapies are considered for each individual case of PTSD. Some of these may include antidepressants, talk therapy, and prescription medication. Research concerning PTSD is ongoing, and new treatments are being developed every day.
The Vietnam War was a conflict between North and South Vietnam concerning territorial control and the growth of communism in the North, or the Viet Cong. The war lasted 21 years, spanning from 1954 to 1975, and the U.S. military joined South Vietnam in the ongoing battle against communism and the Viet Cong in 1965. The costs and losses resulting from the war became too much for the U.S., so they ultimately withdrew their involvement in the war effort in 1973. There was a total of 2 million deaths across both sides, and 1.1 million of those belonged to the Viet Cong. During the time of the U.S.'s involvement in the war, American citizens were split between whether or not to withdraw U.S. troops in Vietnam, which induced many protests and movements concerning the war.
Beginning in 1965, the majority of Americans opposed the war effort. This event was marked by the 20,000-person anti-war march into Washington, D.C., and after this, large anti-war marches became common events in America. In 1970, police forces shot peaceful protesters conducting an anti-war march in Ohio, which only made them more determined to protest further, creating Vietnam Veterans Against the War and the March for Moratorium on the War.
PTSD was officially recognized in 1980, 5 years after the end of the Vietnam War, because of multiple reported cases of insomnia, depression, and nightmares from war veterans. Vietnam veterans brought forth the name PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, for this illness. 50 years later, this disorder is still prominent and chronic in some. PTSD is more predominant in theater veterans, the soldiers who were often fighting while in Vietnam. But it is still presented in era veterans, soldiers that were in Vietnam but never fought. Although theater veterans seem to be more related to PTSD, substance abuse, and depression. In 1987, a survey showed that theater veterans with PTSD are 2 times more likely to die earlier in life than other veterans. In 2013, another study showed that 7% of female Vietnam veterans and 11% of male still suffer from PTSD.
Many veterans were able to build new lives after the war, even though some experienced challenges in the home, with family, and the ability to find a job. Many of these veterans have spoken out about their experiences and challenges after service in the war. While last names were not mentioned, some veterans who have spoken out were veterans by the name of Warren, Jim, and Jesse. Warren was deployed as a tunneler, a soldier that traveled through underground tunnels to observe and spy on the Viet Cong. After he returned home, he was a victim of dramatic flashbacks so severe that he no longer wanted to sleep. He was also hospitalized for substance abuse. He was given access to therapists for assistance, but was too prideful to reach out to them. He eventually learned to face his triggers and is currently working to improve his PTSD.
Jim was in the Air Force in Vietnam for 4 years, but was ashamed of his role in the war and wanted to leave it in his past. He wanted to move on, but he could not escape his part in the war. 2 of his friends from the war died from suicide and drug overdose. After these sad events, Jim joined VA counseling and was diagnosed with PTSD. He is now completely willing to discuss the war and finds relief in speaking to people about his PTSD. Jesse fought in Vietnam for 4 years and was returned home after being shot in an ambush. He hid from his service and memories of the war and resorted to substance abuse and had symptoms of depression and PTSD. Jesse also participated in VA therapy groups and believes the camaraderie and sharing of his stories slightly helped to improve his PTSD.
PTSD veteran groups are said to be effective by their members in ways that professional therapies and medicines are not. This may be because many of these members were trained in military units, which were based on teamwork. These groups bridge the gap between war and day-to-day life and are said to have helped many people turn their lives around. Today, many of these groups are being shut down due to the lack of concrete evidence of improvement in members' PTSD. This development is a move in completely the wrong direction towards the development of a cure for PTSD.
Jack Adornetto began his service in the Vietnam War at age 20 and believes he experienced a change in himself and his personality once he returned home from combat.
Because you have to. And that's one of the things about being in the military is you're forced to grow up very quick.
He believes PTSD is driven by anxiety and fear, which manifests itself into the fact that no one knew where the enemy was in a dense jungle.
You never know where the enemy is. You go into a village of Vietnamese people, or in my case, a lot of them are Montagnards, and you don't know whether they're friendly or not friendly.
Soldiers returning from Vietnam were treated poorly, and the frustrations on the very unpopular war were taken out on the veterans. The VA was also unhelpful for veterans attempting to find jobs and solve problems.
I was not treated poorly. I was basically just sort of ignored, which was fine for me. But I had gone to, I couldn't find a job. And I'm a college graduate, but I never worked because I went straight from college to the military. And employers at that time didn't look upon your military experience as being worth much.
This is not the only event in which PTSD has been very occurrent. The psychological events after the Vietnam War can be connected to the ongoing wars in the Middle East that have similar mental health effects on veterans to the Vietnam War.
All Vietnam veterans were affected by the war, either positively or negatively, and it is still a part of each and every one of their lives.
It's 50 years now since I came home. It will be 50 years in, I think, February, since I came home. And I don't have any regrets. I wish I would have done a few things differently. I wish I would have been better prepared for what was coming, but I think I had just adapted quite well. I did the job I was asked to do, and I took care of the men who served under me.
Veterans today are still fighting for better treatment plans and a more successful way of improving their mental health. These veterans broke and are currently breaking the barrier that is PTSD by learning from their experiences and devising plans and treatments to assist veterans struggling with PTSD and to continue searching for a cure.
Think of yourself as a 18-year-old kid, and you're sitting on the edge of a helicopter, and you got all of this weight on you, and you got a gun, and you're coming down into what they call a landing zone, and you've got 30 or 40 other guys around you, and the helicopter's coming down, and people start shooting at you, and you're about 6 feet off, 5 feet off the ground, and helicopter guy in the helicopter is saying, "Jump, get out of here, get out," so they can get out. So I said, now that's fear.